Welcome back to Neon Galactic, a YouTube podcast produced by Keat TV in Eureka, California, a nonprofit PBS affiliate. I'm your host, James Falk. Thanks for joining us. A lot has been happening in the UFO world recently, from comments by former Aero director Sean Kirkpatrick seeking to pour cold water on all the recent speculation about any seemingly otherworldly explanations for unidentified anomalous phenomenon, to the unclassified version of a report just issued today by the Inspector General of the Department of Defense that decries the lack of unity and focus in the Department of Defense's apparent efforts to figure these things out. We're joined today by Kevin Knuth, a physicist and associate professor at the State University of New York at Albany. I should say Dr. Kevin Knuth, who has worked long and hard on the UFO topic while also pursuing a remarkably successful career as a NASA consultant, an expert on exoplanets, and much else. He's written some of the most oft-quoted and important academic papers on the subject, is a member of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, and a research associate with the Galileo Project. He was also featured in at least 2 recent UAP documentaries, Encounters on Netflix, which was exceedingly well done, and the exciting Terror in the Sky, which is now available for view for free on the Tubi app. Thanks for joining us, Kevin.
Well, thank you. You know, actually, right now I'm actually a full professor at UAlbany. I got promoted to full professor last year, which I consider to be a feat, considering I've been studying UAPs for the last 5 years. So I figured that, you know, if I can get promoted to full professor while studying UAPs, that's pretty good.
No, it's almost like it's an endorsement, right? I mean, that sounds good. And
almost an endorsement.
I've been watching, this whole process unfold from, the government basically tacitly acknowledging that these things are real to the and the UAP task force and to how it later evolved into Aero. And I'm frustrated. And I'm sure that a lot of people are, because it seems like for every step forward, there's 2 or 3 or 5 steps back in terms of any kind of official acknowledgement that these things are real. You are a lauded scientist, and you've been studying this for a while. Can you tell us, in your opinion, where the science currently actually is at with UAPs? I mean, for months, people were saying, well, the government's actually acknowledged that they're real now, but it seems like they're waffling on that statement, and they don't really want to come out and say that it's real in a way that's in any kind of way special or exceptional. Where's the science right now?
That's really the question to ask. There's a lot to talk about, and that I'd like to get off my chest as well. It's been frustrating, but where's the science? That's really the question, and the fact is that there are now multiple scientific groups around the world that are working to collect data on these objects. And this is what's needed more than anything. We need to collect data. We need to do it scientifically. We need to be sharing data and communicating with each other so that we can get our heads around this phenomenon. Mm-hmm. We especially, people who have been looking at the UFO problem have this tendency to look to the U.S. government for answers, right?
Yes,
Which that's never going to happen. You're not going to get answers from the U.S. government. They've been telling us that there's nothing to see here, folks, for 80 years. And they're still telling us that. Meanwhile, while they're telling us that, the Navy is going to Congress saying, we have a problem with UAPs. We have a problem with these unknown objects that are causing flight safety hazards, right? And this is well established now. So we have a flight safety hazard, and there's still nothing to see here. These people aren't dependable. Yeah, they aren't. I'm sorry to say. The people in charge of keeping this country safe clearly aren't working well, and they say so in the report. They say we don't communicate well with each other. We're not doing our jobs. That's what they're saying, and I hate to say that. I would rather think otherwise, but that's not what the evidence tells us. As long as there's secrecy, as long as they're not being forthcoming, that's a problem. And so the solution has been throughout this whole time that scientists need to get involved. There's a great quote from Jon Stewart, where he once said, "Isn't it amazing what scientists can do when no one makes them stop?" And I love that quote. I absolutely love that quote. And he's absolutely right. And I've long said, since I got involved, I've said, once we get some scientists involved who realize that this is a real phenomena that needs to be studied and needs to be understood, then there's no stopping it. We're going to study it, and we'll do it without funds if we have to, which is mostly what is going on now, because there is no government funding for this. The private foundations probably won't touch this. You can get funding from private individuals, perhaps, like the Galileo project did, if you're lucky. We've not been that lucky. At UAPx, I'm also the lead scientist at UAPx, and
Yeah.
and people can donate through our website. Please do. We do need the money to do the work that we want to do, but where the science is we're trying to actually collect data on these things. We want to pick them up on camera with multiple cameras so that we can triangulate positions and trajectories. We want to estimate speeds and accelerations. We want to measure spectra so we can look at the light coming off of these things. That'll tell us a lot about their temperatures that they're operating at, whether in some cases it appears that they have strong electric fields that are ionizing the air and creating a plasma around them, which makes them fuzzy looking, which is why nobody can get good photographs of these things.
Yeah.
That's a constant criticism. The reason you can't get good photographs is because there's physics involved. There's physics that are messing up the photographs. There's physics here that we don't understand, and we need to learn this and understand it. And it's exciting. I find this fascinating and exciting.
Yeah. As
I'm
do
not
I.
surprised by what came out of the government, what came out of Aero so far. It doesn't surprise me at all. They're saying what they've said for 80 years.
Yeah.
So
I
no,
think there was,
nothing to see here. Nothing
yeah,
interesting to see here. Meanwhile, the Navy has problems. Ryan Graves, pilot has come out and said we encounter these things on a daily basis,
yeah.
and it's
Well,
a flight. It's a flight hazard, and but the government is saying there's nothing to see here. They're inconsistent. They're unreliable, and that's all there is to it.
yeah, I mean, it's basically, it seems like that, I mean, it's obvious that their interest in the topic has less to do with public disclosure than with national security. And whenever those two things compete against each other, the government's always going to choose national security. One of the things
Although
you
they
just,
also claim there's no national security issues either.
well,
So,
yeah. Well, then, but
so
today, the IG's report said that there actually is, and that there needs to be better
they did say that
communication.
in this report. I did
Yeah.
notice that. You're absolutely right, and that's a very good point.
Yeah.
So there is a national security issue, but apparently there's nothing to worry about.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know what that issue is,
Mm,
or maybe it doesn't exist, but well,
yeah, they're just inconsistent, and I don't find them trustworthy, and that's a problem.
yeah,
It's sad. I mean, we have a problem in this country right now of people not trusting their government. I mean, the government, those people we elect aren't doing their jobs. The people we are have hired to do jobs aren't doing them either. And this is coming out, and we're realizing this as a public, and we don't have faith in our government. And that's a problem. And I worry about that with scientists as well. We have prominent scientists who are saying, oh, UFOs are nonsense. This is all nonsense, whereas they haven't even looked at the problem. And they're saying that because they're we have to take people how to think critically, and we have to do this. But what happens when it turns out that it was something, and all of these scientists for years who have been for decades who have been telling us it's nothing turn out to be wrong?
yeah,
We're going to lose faith in science even further. I
exactly
worry
right.
about that too. It's a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
problem.
Well, that's what's interesting
Instead,
to
we should
watch.
all be doing our jobs. Scientists study things. That's what
Yeah,
we do.
yeah,
We
yeah,
don't declare that it's nonsense. We don't declare that we shouldn't be bother studying it. We study it.
yeah,
That's what you do. If you don't want to study it as a scientist, go study something else. Go study active galactic nuclei and be happy doing that. I don't care what you study, but don't diss on somebody else's research. Yeah, I think that's unreasonable.
it was interesting when you said that, we need to think critically. Part of what uh, was thrown under the bus during Fitzpatrick's recent op-ed was this idea that, our people are going increasingly loony over things that are conspiratorial. And it kind of lumps UAPs in with like QAnon and like these other issues that have kind of become, cultural, zeitgeists
Well,
or whatever. But
yeah.
they're not the same. But because
No.
they don't accept it. They lump them together. And then for a lot of people, they're just going to see that and say, oh, well, they're obviously it's, it's crap and it's not worth investigating because it's all part of that same thing, but it's not.
That's how this has been covered up the whole time. It isn't been a big conspiracy. You don't need a big conspiracy to cover this up. You
Yeah.
just have to make a joke about little green men and everybody walks away giggling. That's
Yeah.
all you need to do. You just need to discredit it a little bit. And because people don't want to believe it anyway. So it's easy to cover it up. And that's the technique they've been using for 80 years and they've just used it again. You can't accuse this whole, this whole belief that there's something interesting here as being conspiratorial, and then at the same time say there's really no evidence of anything strange, but this is a national security issue and a flight safety hazard.
Yeah.
You can't do all three at the same time. That's inconsistent, and it's
Yeah.
logically inconsistent, and it indicates a problem. Is it a conspiracy? I don't think so. Is it misbehavior? Probably. Is it ineptitude? Very probably. I think that's all it comes down to. And it's too bad because I'd like to be able to trust these departments to do what they're supposed to do, but they admit that they can't do it. We don't talk well to each other. We don't play well with each other. They say that.
Yeah.
Congress wanted reports last year from all of the agencies, and not all of them complied. They didn't even listen to what Congress told them to do.
Yeah.
What's happening in this country where we have three-letter organizations not listening to Congress? That's a problem. This is a democracy. I'm sorry, this is my country.
Yeah.
I pay my taxes. I pay your salary.
Yeah.
You work for me, and they work for you too. And they work for all of us. And this is a flight safety hazard. I want to know about it.
Yeah.
We have an infrared video of one of these objects following shadowing is the term, shadowing a jet airplane, a passenger jet that's coming in to land at Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
This thing is following it.
That takes intelligence.
Does the pilot know? If the pilot knows, the pilot's probably worried because that's happened.
Yeah.
They've had pilots have taken evasive maneuvers to avoid these things. Passenger jet pilots have. You got 250 people on this plane and it's being followed by an unknown object. We don't have no idea what the heck it is. It was 60 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, so it's running cold, which is strange.
Wow.
And the thing's shaped like a 4-leaf clover. It's or 3-leaf clover. It looked to me, I joked it looked like a Klingon warship. But that's what it looked like on infrared, but it's fuzzy. It's not a good image, right? And but people should know that this is happening, and if somebody spots it, they're going to be worried. I mean, this is happening we had flights from LA to Hawaii, and they'd been followed by UAPs this last summer for 40 minutes, or for most of the flight. These lights would be following them.
Yeah.
Don't we all deserve to know what these things are? Why isn't this being studied? Why isn't this a national security issue? Where's the Coast Guard? Where's the Navy? Where's the Air Force? And why aren't they being forthcoming? These are all important questions.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that we have people in Congress who are looking into this. I'm glad, I'm thankful for Senator Schumer and Senator Gillibrand, who are both my senators. I'm thankful for Congressman Burchett and Luna and the others who were all on the House panel. I'm thankful for that. They're looking into this, and on some hand, this is coming about because of a mistrust of the government, but in some sense, this mistrust has been earned. And and I'm hoping that they continue to look in this further and push harder because we do deserve answers.
Well, it's interesting too when people talk about the conspiratorial theorizing that goes on, because the government every step of the way has lied, obfuscated, not told the complete truth, changed stories. The fact that we can't nail down the truth is the government's fault.
That's
if we had just said 80 years ago, let's figure this thing out, and until we figured it out, not say much more about it, we would be much further along. But instead, we've had to play this game of, and you talk, people's lives have been destroyed, and through the obvious actions of government. So, in a way, there has been a conspiracy.
I prefer not to use conspiracy. I prefer to say that they're inept.
Yeah.
They're not doing their jobs. Fire them all and hire new people.
Yeah. And there's also. And people are different groups are coming at it from different angles.
I'm throwing out rash statements here, but that I don't really mean. I don't really mean you should go fire everybody in the Navy or the Air Force, but some of these people need to start doing their jobs. And their job isn't to keep this quiet. It isn't to cover it up. It isn't to keep secrets. It's to inform Congress as to what the problems are and to solve them. And pilots need to know what they can possibly encounter in our airspace.
Absolutely.
They need to know what they can encounter. They need to know whether there's a threat. They need to know what the dangers are, what these things look like, so they can be identified. This is important. And and I'm trying to do my job as a scientist, and unfortunately I don't get much criticism at all. There's a few giggles here and there, like, oh, UFO joke from another scientist once in a while, but that's all I get, which I'm thankful for, because I'm trying to do my job to study these things, as are, other scientists and other groups. You have the Galileo Project, you have the Society, SCU, which is studying UAP. It's a scientific coalition studying UAP.
Yeah.
You have IFIX in Germany. You have VASCO in Sweden. There's a group in Korea, a group in Portugal. There's the South Americans are involved. There are scientists now all over the world, and we're trying to actually collect data on these things and theorizing as to what they can be. And it's a difficult job. It's hard to figure out what these things are, because they're not necessarily just one thing.
Yeah.
And it's an unknown. So there are probably multiple things that they are. Some of them are weather balloons. Yes, definitely some of them are balloons. They're not all balloons. And those are the ones we're worried about.
Yeah. The 5% that it's not.
And then you have the op-ed from Kirkpatrick. What he learned is that U.S. government's UFO hunter, as if that makes him the world authority on the topic or anything.
Yeah.
I doubt that he had all of the information available.
Well, and even if he did, I don't know if he'd be able to talk about
each
it.
other.
Yeah.
In the report today, they were saying that they don't even talk to each other well. So I doubt that Arrow got everything that's important.
Yeah.
And he says there's no evidence of aliens. Well, that's fine. Proving that something is alien is hard. If you're going to prove something extraterrestrial, you have to be able to show that it comes from another planet. If you're going to need an alien body, just even having an advanced craft isn't going to prove that it's alien. You're going to need an alien body, and even then, it isn't obvious that they're from another planet.
Yeah, there's all kinds of explanations.
And this is one of the hypotheses on the table, is they're not from another planet. They're from here.
Yeah,
they might be living in our oceans. That's another hypothesis. Yeah. And you could have been living here the whole time, or they could be from Earth originally. We don't actually know what the answers are. And so it's very easy to say there's no evidence of aliens, but we don't use the term aliens anymore. And you'll see this in Congress. We use the term non-humans.
Yeah.
Right. It's a non-human intelligence, because we don't know where they're from. We have no idea where they're from, what their intentions are, and what they're actually doing. And
that's part of one of the things I wanted to ask you is like with, David Grush, who is a hero in my mind. I think he put a lot of his life at risk and came forward with some vital information. But part of me, honestly, was not against David Grush coming forward as much as wondering if the timing was best for his disclosure at that point. I wonder if more of the public could have been brought along if we were just focusing on whether something extraordinary and so far unexplainable according to our science exists in the skies before we immediately jump to, intact craft in hangars in Nevada and alien bodies. While I believe what he's saying, and I believe he heard those things and heard from firsthand witnesses, and maybe even have firsthand experience himself, for the bulk of people, as soon as they hear alien bodies, they shut down filters and they're not willing to entertain that. And it seems like what we really need to establish, and this is where I think the work that your organizations are doing, is to prove that there's something weird going on in the sky that doesn't fit within our scientific models. And once you do that, then the explanations have to open up, because you're looking for a rational explanation, and what we have so far doesn't fit. What are your thoughts on that?
No, those are my thoughts exactly, which is why I pursue the areas I've pursued. One of the first things that I decided to look at when I decided to study this was to look at speeds and accelerations.
Yeah. And you've written papers.
That's something you can sometimes estimate from observers. You can estimate that from radar data. You can estimate it from videos. We can do this. And what I found was that in the, the Nimitz, the 2004 Nimitz case was special in that there were several instances where you could estimate speeds and accelerations. And in each of those, the speeds and accelerations were unreasonably high. In the one case where Senior Chief Day saw on radar, these things were dropping from 28,000 feet to sea level in 0.78 seconds. You can estimate the minimum acceleration. They had to at least be accelerating about 6,000 Gs. That's 6,000 times the acceleration of gravity. So what does that do to you?
Exactly.
This is why it's unreasonable. So right now I'm sitting here in a 1G room. I'll be kind to myself and say the top half, consider the top half part of me that weighs 100 pounds. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And now you put me in 1,000 Gs. That 100 pounds is going to feel like 100,000 pounds. At 6,000 Gs, it's going to feel like 600,000 pounds. What is that top half of your body going to do to the lower half?
Yeah.
It's soup. I mean, you're going to be a puddle on the floor. There's no getting around it. There's no flight suit. There's no anything that's going to save you from that. And, that's what happens to an organism. What happens to equipment? Equipment doesn't survive this either. Our new fighter jets, the F-35 fighter, the wings get ripped off at 13.5 G. The wings will rip off.
Yeah.
You couldn't accelerate any of our craft at these speeds. Missiles can handle higher Gs because they are going much faster and sometimes have to maneuver. So they can maneuver typically up to around 35 Gs, and their airframes can withstand about 65 Gs.
Yeah.
You're still off by a factor of 100.
Yeah.
So whatever these things are, they're unreasonable. Now you can easily say, well, what if Senior Chief Day was wrong? What if the Nimitz encounter video is wrong? What if there were mistakes made? That's fine, but those aren't the only pieces of evidence. You have radar data from the Mino Air Force Base in the 60s that show high accelerations and high speeds. You have Hermann Oberth, who was the rocketry pioneer. He was the mentor of Wernher von Braun.
That's right. Yeah.
Hermann Oberth gave a talk in the 1950s and in 54 or 55 on UFOs. And he described them reaching speeds up to about 45,000 miles an hour. And he said in his talk, if it were just one or two radar measurements, then I wouldn't believe it. But he goes, but there's over 50 that I've observed.
Yeah.
And that's what he said in 1955. So and he points out that there's no fireball, there's no sonic boom, which is a mystery. And in fact, Sean Kirkpatrick wrote a paper with Avi Loeb from the Galileo project on how moving at those speeds, you expect there to be a sonic boom, you expect there to be fireballs, right? I mean, you get friction from the atmosphere is going to heat that thing up like crazy at those speeds.
Yeah.
But their paper is not that fascinating, sadly. I mean, it's good work and they're right, but there was a paper in Science in the 1960s that said the same thing. These can't be spacecraft because there would be sonic booms and fireballs, but yet there's not. And Hermann Oberth points that out in 1955. We see that in the data we've looked at. Daniel Kumbi, another physicist from the Niels Bohr Institute in Denmark, analyzed the radar data from the Japanese airline case, JAL 1628, where you had a large craft, about 3 747s in size, walnut-shaped, followed a 747, a Japanese 747, for about 40 minutes across Alaskan airspace. And this thing was zipping back and forth about 7 miles away from it around the plane and panicked the pilots, right? We have the transcripts from the pilot. We have the radar data. That was all saved by the FAA Chief of Accidents and Investigations, John Callahan. President Reagan's scientific team came to collect that data. They confiscated it.
Reagan's team.
And according to Callahan, they were excited because they never had 40 minutes of radar data of one of these things. So they were excited. But Callahan was smart. He copied it and stashed it under his desk and kept it there for a decade. He kept it there for a decade and made it public. So Daniel Kumbi, another physicist from the Niels Bohr Institute, analyzed that radar data. And he estimated accelerations of this thing the size of an aircraft carrier was accelerating at 10,000 Gs and reached a top speed of about 250,000 miles an hour. At 250,000 miles an hour, you can get to the moon in less than an hour. It's about a 50-minute trip to the moon.
So in your experience and your theorizing,
So,
what do you think most explains or best explains those maneuverabilities?
I don't know if these things are spaceships, but they move as fast as spaceships move.
Yeah.
So the assumption that they're not spaceships is silly. Just blowing it off. They can't be spaceships. People always say, why does everybody assume that they're spaceships? Well, because it's simple. It's simple because they go faster, as fast as, or faster than spaceships move. So the Tic Tac, as it dropped accelerated down at 6,000 Gs and then decelerated before it hit the ocean. At the midpoint, its speed is about 45,000 miles an hour, similar to what Hermann Oberth reported in the 1950s.
Yeah.
That's how fast the New Horizons probe that visited Pluto was going.
And that's after months of acceleration, right? Or years of acceleration too. Right?
That's years. Yeah, that was using gravity assists and all sorts of histrionics to get it up to a high speed. This Tic Tac accelerated to that speed in half of 0.78 seconds. So that's a third of a second. A third of a second it accelerates to the speed of the New Horizons probe. And we're about to go, and then you got the Japanese airline case, this thing's accelerating back and forth. In 12, the radar was sweeping every 12 seconds, and that's how he was estimating the accelerations. So this thing accelerated from 0 to about 250,000 miles an hour in about 6 seconds. 6 seconds to get to a speed where you can get to the moon in less than an hour. We're about to go back to the moon, and we've got, another 300-foot tall rocket that's got a nuclear bomb's worth of fuel in it that we're going to burn this giant flame. And it's going to take them 3 days to get there, right? The same as Apollo. We are clearly missing something here, and there is something to see here. There's something very exciting to see here, and yeah, there's a reason to cover it up because you don't want everybody to have this technology. I mean, this would be really disruptive technology. You could get to New York and to London. You could have taxis the size of the Tic Tac, which was about 40 feet across, right? The size of an F-18. You could have a taxi that could get from New York to London in less than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Faster than you can get across Midtown Manhattan in a taxi. You could get from New York to London. What does that do to the airlines? The airlines are a billion-dollar industry. We wouldn't need them.
Yeah.
Anybody could get anywhere in 10 minutes. Which anywhere on the planet in 10 minutes, which is highly disruptive. You worry about immigrants now. Anybody could get anywhere in 10 minutes. There's reasons to keep this quiet.
Yeah.
There really are. But instead of just keeping it quiet, let's figure this out and figure out how to deal with this now.
Yeah.
Because eventually somebody's going to figure it out, or eventually it's going to be disclosed.
Yeah. When I hear about people talking about the mode of or the mechanism of travel, often you hear anti-gravitics or you hear an Alcubierre worm drive or warp drive. Yeah, and I'm wondering, those aren't the same thing, right? Those are two different approaches to it. I mean,
not exactly the same thing. There's a few different ways of warping space-time to account for this. The reason that people go there is because of these high accelerations.
Yeah.
There's no way that people or passengers or pilots could survive them. There's no way that most equipment won't survive it. So it's hard to imagine that you can make something that's going to accelerate at 10,000 G. So the way to think about this is to, if you are somehow bypassing inertia, right? You somehow have to get around the inertia problem. And we don't know many ways to do this, but one way to do this is to create basically warp space-time so that where you're sitting in space-time is nice and flat and nothing, you've got no acceleration, but you basically accelerate space-time with you riding inside of it. And that's one of the ways around this idea. And that's why people have gone that direction. And anything that's anti-gravity can, basically is bypassing inertia again. So, so that's usually the the go-to explanation, although I don't know of any physical evidence that suggests that that's actually happening. And that's one of the other important reasons why we need to be collecting data.
Yeah.
If you want to know how some of these things operate, you need to collect data on them. We know that that warping space-time like that is going to create what we call blue shifts and red shifts in the spectra. So you should be able to see that happening.
Yeah.
Um,
And there are
I've
reports that
I've
are
heard
similar
from
to that, right?
I've heard from private, people who've been involved with the Pentagon have told me that they do have evidence of this. I've not seen it, and in the infrared images we've looked at, that doesn't seem to be the case either.
Yeah.
So
It's that frustration. It's like we hear of all these things that are the data on the inside, but no one can get to it. And that's like, if there's,
right.
to me, if there's an ontological fact that totally throws everything we believe up into the air and the government's holding on to that, that speaks to a serious rot in the system. I mean, basically you're making people exist in a reality that's not real because you don't want to be honest. And if that's the case, that's, despicable.
Well, I think
And then,
the concern that those of us who've really worked to study this have, our gut feeling is that the disclosure of aliens wouldn't be horribly disruptive. It will be disruptive. It's going to cause problems, but it's not going to really hurt that badly,
yeah,
as badly as other things might be. But and so it leads some of us to worry that there maybe is a bigger secret.
yeah.
There's something worse that they've learned that's scarier that
Yeah.
they really
It's
don't
somehow
want.
related, and therefore
Somehow
if you disclose
related.
one,
It
maybe
might be a bigger secret, and that might be why that hasn't been disclosed. There might be a reason for not disclosing it, and that's what
yeah,
we're worried about.
yeah.
Um,
Now, one thing I noticed is that Terror in the Sky, the movie you guys were in, your setup was fantastic,
it
and it
was a
seemed,
great setup, but that movie. There's when you watch it, there's a lot of excitement there,
yeah,
and that excitement was real. I mean, we were there with that kind of equipment for the first time, and I have to credit David Mason for bringing a lot of that along. Those FLIR cameras were his.
yeah.
He owned them, and
He
that was
invented a lot of that stuff too, right? Wasn't
he
he like,
invented a few. Well,
yeah,
he built. Yeah, he invented the method for transmitting the light out and trying to receive it.
okay, the communication part of it,
He
right?
built the optical binoculars, which I don't think that ended up in the movie. That's a fun invention. He didn't invent that exactly. That's been around for a while, but and I'm working on building one myself now. But you basically put a photocell in one lens of the binoculars, and
Mm-hmm.
that records the light. So if you look at a car, the light from the car, the light's being modulated by vibrations in the hood or the roof of the car that you're watching. So you can actually hear the engine running. So if you take those light vibrations and put it into sound, you can hear the engine running.
Oh my
So he brought one of
God,
these along that he had made. It was fun to play with. And you look at a
sure.
jet airplane with it and you can hear the roar of the engines. And the idea was we get a real UFO, we look at it with these binoculars and we can record the vibrations on the surface of the UFO.
Yeah,
Which was a brilliant idea, and it's not exactly his idea originally. There's a few other people who've had this. I think William Beatty, I think his name is, has a website where he tells you how to make one of these things from like the 1970s. So
oh wow,
there was an article in Popular Mechanics in the 1970s on build yourself a UFO observer or something. I mean, it's kind of funny to see that was in Popular Mechanics. I found that recently. So
yeah.
but I'm working to make one of these now because we're not working with him anymore at UAPx. So we've gone different directions, and so but he brought some fantastic equipment along, and I have to credit him for
He
that.
did, and it just
That
seems
was
like
great fun.
that is the protocol for figuring, I mean, ultimately for figuring this thing out. If you can have enough of those stations positioned next to, what would be busy throughways for UAPs, and Catalina Island, I think, was a particularly well-chosen spot.
It was a good place to look. Yeah, I still think that was a great place to look, and I would go back there in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like maybe you need permanent stations in those places, and maybe that's what Galileo might be working on ultimately.
Galileo's project's working on permanent spaces, permanent stations, and I think that's a great idea. we don't have the kind of money they have, so we have to make do with what we got, and we're doing our best. So we're looking at right now, because the Pine Bush area in southern New York is not that far from where we are here in Albany, and there's three of us physicists, me and Matthew Shadagas and Cecilia Levy, are all on this project now. So that's within driving distance, and so we're looking at that. We're also keeping an eye on there's a nuclear power plant that's been decommissioned on the Hudson River south of here near Poughkeepsie. And there's another one, I can't remember what it's called, but it's in Massachusetts. It's near Plymouth Rock. Maybe it's the Plymouth. I think it's the Plymouth nuclear power plant. Both of those have been decommissioned. They both have wastewater that they eventually need to get rid of. And there have been on and off discussions about releasing the wastewater into either the Hudson River, in the case of Poughkeepsie, or the bay or the coast off Boston, in the case of the Plymouth. And in both cases, you'd be releasing radioactive water into the environment. And we know from experience,
but that can draw UAPs, right?
That will draw in UAPs. We know from the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster, when they had the tidal wave, UAPs were there the next day, right? The next day they have UFOs there. That happened in Chernobyl too. Chernobyl went, and the next day there were UFOs in the air. So we know that they show up when this stuff happens. So we're, and of course I'm good friends with Wes Waters, who's one of the lead scientists on the Galileo project, and we're both aware of this. So we're, yes, if we either of us gets information about one of these nuclear power plants dumping anything in the environment, we're there in a minute, and we'll collect data. So
just put a suit on first, right?
Exactly. Right.
Now, I noticed that you're an exoplanet expert or a specialist, or you are.
Yes.
Now, so can you talk
in fact,
a little bit?
we just got a NASA grant funded this year to do some more studies of exoplanets, which is fantastic.
Yeah. So my question is, where do the two meet? I've heard there was rumors going around that someone from Britain who studies exoplanets may have a major announcement coming up. And there was a lot of hubbub about whether or not that meant there was technosignatures or biosignatures may be found in an atmosphere. But can you talk a little bit about how that study informs your interest in UAPs?
Oh, that's a good question. They're not immediately related. They are related in the sense of looking for what we call technosignatures. So a technosignature is any kind of signal that indicates the presence of technology. So a UAP study here on Earth would be like looking for technosignatures here on Earth that aren't non-human technosignatures.
Sure.
Kind of like I wish we had such a thing, but Captain Jack and Doctor Who had a thing to scan for alien, alien technology. I would love to have something like that. But that's basically the idea: is there a way for us to somehow scan for alien technology? But do this by looking at for exoplanets, we look at the only thing you can record is really light, right? When you're doing astronomy, so you have to look at spectra, and very often you're paying attention to when the planet moves in front of the starlight goes through the atmosphere, so the atmosphere will absorb certain frequencies of light or certain wavelengths of light depending on the chemical constituents in the atmosphere. And so can you detect what
methane or things like that would
you detect what chemicals are there? Is it methane, carbon dioxide? Is there oxygen? Is there water? Is there oxygen? These are questions. And there's a lot of discussion now on what happens if you detect an oxygen atmosphere, or what happens if you detect this. Is it really evidence of life, or isn't it? Is it just circumstantial? Is it and I suspect, I don't know what the big announcement is or what the discovery coming up is, but my guess is it probably has to do with they've used some kind of spectra, has detected some kind of chemical that they didn't expect, right? And so, and that's usually the problem. It's a chemical you don't expect, and sometimes it's a chemical that you don't expect that here on Earth only results from life. So the assumption is maybe there's life there, but I think you can't do better than that, because there could be other processes that give rise to that chemical too that you're just not aware of. Right?
Not
There's a lot
familiar
we
with.
don't know, and that makes it hard.
Yeah.
It's
It's interesting.
so this is where the exoplanet work kind of merges with the UAP work, looking for technosignatures. So that there now are people looking for city lights on other planets, right?
Yeah.
You could do that. You could look for laser beams from laser communications. That's another thing to look for. So there are people looking for laser beams. You get Star Wars, they start shooting lasers at each other. Some of these lasers go flying off into space and might hit your telescope, and then you detected a laser, right?
Yeah.
So this is the idea. I mean, we're just trying to detect whatever we can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's the sort of the cosmic detective story, trying to figure out like what evidence is available and what it means. Now, if I've heard correctly, if they find an atmosphere that has similar levels of oxygen as the Earth's atmosphere, that might be a tale for life, right?
It's probably, yeah, that's the general belief is that would be pretty indicative of life. Oxygen is highly reactive. Anybody who's been in the California wildfires knows that oxygen is highly reactive. So it doesn't last very long in a just a regular environment. It doesn't last long. It has to be replenished, which is what we need trees for. Plants, that's what the plants do here on Earth. And in fact, early on in Earth's history, before there was an oxygen environment, you had the dominant life forms were things called stromatolites, which were related to algae and algae mats. And they started producing oxygen as a byproduct, right, of light coming in and absorbing light and using light for energy. So they start producing oxygen as a byproduct, and this oxygen started killing everything because the things that were living on Earth at the time did not evolve in an oxygen environment. So that's called the Great Oxidization Event. And it wiped out a large percentage of life on Earth. Actually, it almost killed everything.
Wow.
But then life started evolving to take advantage of the oxygen, and then we have what we have today.
Yeah.
We have plants that resulted from these things that produce oxygen, and you have animals like us that use oxygen.
Yeah, so it's a perfect self-completing circle.
And now you have a nice
yeah.
cycle. Once you you can control these things with cycles, right? So once you make up a cycle, things are good.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you as a scientist, and I've asked other scientists I've had on the show, there's a lot of debate about whether consciousness is a part of the phenomenon in terms of the human mind, how we perceive of it, how we perceive, our perceptions themselves, and this relates to, ontology, whether or not we have an idealist ontology of consciousness as primary versus a materialist idea. Where do you fall on that scale of ontologies, first off? And do you think that consciousness, even though we don't have a mechanism in place for how it might be involved, is at play?
Those are really good questions, and those are long discussions too.
Sure they are. Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm trying to think of how to sum up my thoughts on this. Is consciousness primary? Let me handle that first. I studied for my PhD work, I studied neuroscience, and that
I
was
saw that. That's one of the reasons why I
and
wanted to ask you. Yeah.
I studied magnetic fields generated by the human auditory cortex. Very small magnetic fields, femtotesla, tiny fields. You need superconducting quantum interference devices to measure these things. And then I did my postdoctoral work was all in neuroscience. Before I went to NASA, I was at a brain imaging center and working on developing functional MRI techniques. So I've thought a lot about consciousness, and my feelings have always been that consciousness is not as fantastic as we make it out to be. I've kind of always viewed it this way, in that you have, your brain is modeling the world around it all of the time, right? This is how we learn things, and you update your models of how the world works, and this is how you function in the world. But your brain also models itself. And that kind of self-feedback is really, when you consider the dynamics of this, it can get very messy, and you get into the whole field of nonlinear dynamics very quickly, and it can lead to some bizarre results. And I've always felt that consciousness comes out as basically that your brain is just modeling itself.
Self-reflective
However,
ego, basically, right? I mean, is that where you're?
yeah, so I've always felt that that's been the mechanism. However, I am now that I'm looking into some of these things that are related to UFOs, it doesn't feel that simple. Now, the problem here is that when people have close-up encounters with UFOs, or claim to have close-up encounters with UFOs, all sorts of strange things happen. Really, they report all sorts of really bizarre things that can include paranormal phenomena too. And they can have paranormal phenomena continue to have them after encountering UFOs. And the term for this is high strangeness. We call it high strangeness. So you may have a close encounter with a UFO, and the next thing you know, you've got poltergeist activity in your house, right? I mean, this is what people report. I'm just telling you what people report.
Yeah,
and,
no, I know. Yeah.
Is this easy to believe? No, it's not easy to believe. But
is it easy to believe that everyone's lying about it either?
But this
That's
is
not,
widely reported, and is widely reported across cultures, across times, and that's puzzling. So it's not clear what's all going on. And in fact, so let me give you my hypothesis as to what's happening rather than talking about how weird it all is.
Yes, thank you.
I suspect that there's a lot we don't know about the universe. We haven't studied consciousness very well. When I was a postdoc, we called consciousness the C word. You weren't allowed to study consciousness. You couldn't publish a paper. You couldn't get a paper published on consciousness back in the mid 1990s. That wasn't possible, and we called it the C word. And anytime somebody talked about it, it was like, whoa, careful. We're not allowed to study that. Which looking back is kind of silly now. Because consciousness is now being more and more studied. So we don't know a lot about consciousness, and there are other phenomena that also haven't been studied. And you can giggle all you want, but the fact is they haven't been studied. ESP hasn't been studied, telekinesis hasn't been studied, telepathy hasn't been studied. People have claimed these things for centuries. But it's never actually been studied. We've been just told that's nonsense. We don't study that, right? The same thing we were told about UFOs.
There's been some isolated studying, right? I mean, Robert John and what?
It's been studied by there maybe been a few scientists here and there who've studied this quietly, right? In secret,
and they suffer for it. I mean,
and they suffered for it.
Yeah.
So what if some of those phenomena are real? And because this is what's reported, these phenomena are what's reported when people encounter UFOs. So here's my explanation that I think will make this easier to stomach. At least it does for me. What if there's a lot we don't know about the universe because we haven't studied it? And what if some of these phenomena have some element of reality? They might not be being reported accurately because this is a surprise to people and new to them. And there might be some prior bias on how to interpret it. So they might not be being reported accurately, but they might be real phenomena that we just don't know anything about. So let's say you do have somebody who has more advanced technology, which is what some of these UAP appear to be, whoever these peoples are. Now, in addition to having this more advanced technology, in addition to being able to go faster, right, without sonic booms, or enter water without slowing down, and leaving water without slowing down, maybe in addition to this, they take advantage, they have a whole different picture of the universe. They have a different way of looking at physics, right? They might know physics that we don't, that we just haven't studied. And if they did, they might very well take advantage of it. Just like, in the 1600s, they didn't know very much at all about electromagnetism. Yet you and I are talking because of electromagnetism.
Absolutely.
We're taking advantage of this physical phenomena that Newton didn't know anything about.
Yeah.
Right? And Galileo didn't know anything about. To them, this would look like magic. But to us, we're just using electromagnetism. We're using it several ways, right? To get here, you've got a camera that has silicon sensors that change their voltage levels when photons hit them. You have a sound meter, a microphone that's vibrating, and those vibrations are being transduced into electrical signals, and then it's being processed by a computer, which is using electricity in a very different way, and then it's being transmitted by wireless, and possibly even by satellite, so that we're talking to each other. And so there's a lot of bizarre technology being used just to have this podcast.
Yeah.
That would be totally foreign to somebody in the 1600s.
Magical even.
Magical even. And so that could very well be what's happening here, that they have a different picture of the universe. Some of the stuff that we might call paranormal and misinterpret or misunderstand, because we're not at all familiar with it, they could be using as part of their technology.
Yeah.
And given the fact that we already have some information that their technologies are very different than ours. I don't like saying more advanced and less advanced. It's not that simple. It's different, right? It's a different
totally.
technology. Then you might expect that encountering somebody who has a different technology could very well have phenomena that related to it that you might call paranormal, because you don't know what else to call it.
Well, that's what's interesting to me about like our whole approach to science as a society is that we like to tell ourselves that we have the bulk of things figured out. And we operate on that belief. And then, but it seems like every 100 years or so, we're disabused of that notion by a whole new field of things that pops open and becomes subject to study. And all of a sudden, we can do things that we couldn't do before, and things that were previously unexplainable to us are no longer so mysterious. And so part of what people are rejecting when they say that these things can't be happening, they're basically saying there's nothing new left to discover. And
that's exactly the problem. Yep, that's what's happening.
And it's a lack of humility. And I think that no matter where we're at, I mean, I kind of think that there's an infinite above and below us, and we're always going to be finding out new things because the universe is that complex.
It is a lack of humility, and in fact, in the late 1800s, there were a lot of scientists despairing that they pretty much figured everything out.
Yeah.
Once they got the theory of electromagnetism from Maxwell, they'd pretty much figured it all out. What they didn't appreciate then, and that's hard to appreciate, is that there were a few little things that didn't quite make sense.
Exactly right.
Little problems, They couldn't get the heat capacity of crystals right. They couldn't predict the heat capacity of crystals. Other matter they could, but not crystals. Why? They didn't know. They couldn't, why is there doesn't appear to be any ether. So electricity and electromagnetic waves appear to go through the vacuum. So, and why is the speed of light not dependent upon how fast you're moving at the light or away from it? The speed is the same. How does that work? That was the big one that led to special relativity.
So basically, little anomalies, right? Little anomalies.
These little tiny, and they were rather little anomalies, right?
Yeah.
That were nagging at some people who then realized, wait a minute, this picture is a bit wrong. We can do better here. And this led to two big changes. Special relativity was one of them, which led to a better understanding of how space and time work. And the other one was quantum mechanics, which led to us learning how atomic particles worked. But they were even struggling with the theory of an atom. Ludwig Boltzmann had given, who did statistical mechanics, gave a lecture on atoms, and Ernest Mach, on the Mach number, right, came walking out of there, and he said something like, "Oh, I can barely," I can't remember what the quote is. My son could tell me because he used it in a presentation today and in his high school. I should get him down here to say what the quote is.
Yeah.
But he basically walked out of this thing and he goes, "I can barely believe this nonsense about relativity and quantum mechanics, much less this stuff about atoms." And he had a hard time believing that we're atoms, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is 100 years ago.
Yeah, and the progress that science has made in terms of our technologies and our whole worldview has been
transformative.
Yeah, exactly right.
Incredibly transformative.
Yeah.
And the fact is that today, UAPs and paranormal stuff, whatever, however weird you want to get, put that aside. The fact is today we still have little anomalies that are bothering us. The universe is expanding and no one really knows why. We call that dark energy. There's somehow an extra energy in the universe that's making it expand, but we don't know what that is. Dark matter. There is stuff out in space that has that's causing things to gravitate and stick together and changing the rotation rates of galaxies, but we can't see it. We have no idea what it is. And it turns out that once you do the calculations, you find out that 85% of the stuff in the universe is made up of 85% of the universe is made up of stuff that we don't have any clue what it is. We've never experienced it. 85%. So everything that you see in this room right now, everything, look around you, everything here is only 15% of what's actually here.
Yeah.
You are only able to interact with 15%. And this isn't because your eyes only have a certain range and all that. No, it's that other 85% doesn't interact with this stuff.
Yeah.
We are the weird stuff in the universe, actually. The rest of the universe is something else, and we don't know what that is at all.
Yeah.
That's a much bigger anomaly than not being able to calculate the heat capacity of a crystal, which helped to lead to quantum mechanics, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, we know
we're missing something.
So we're talking about the humility factor. We know we don't know everything, and yet we still don't have any of this humility, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's
yeah.
really kind of silly.
Yeah.
And who's to say we don't know what this other 85% of the universe is? It's here in this room. It's here in your room too. I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
We don't interact with it. Or if we do, it's very, very minor interactions that we haven't been able to detect yet. And we don't know what it is. What if it's an environment like here? What if there are animals and creatures living in this other 85% they're walking through you and going through the room right now?
Yeah, there's no way we'd be able to tell.
And you don't know about them, and they might not know about you. That's very possible. We have no idea.
Yeah.
The general assumption right now for people looking for dark matter is that they have to discover the dark matter particle. Now, think about it. So we know that 15% of the universe is made up of all this stuff. I mean, made up of protons, electrons, neutrons, which form to combine 118 elements or something, right?
Yeah.
And then even more isotopes. But the other 85% is made up of one particle? Really? You would think that? That's not my guess. My guess is you've got a whole particle zoo, a whole other zoo of particles that we just don't have any experience with it. That could lead to a whole environment here.
Yeah. One nested within another, potentially,
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, you might have different groups of dark matter particles that also don't interact with each other. So you could have multiple existences all in one place. I don't know. I don't want to use the word universes because then it starts to sound like the multiverse, which is a different idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And just as theoretically challenged as UAPs or anything else, because there's no experiments that can prove the multiverse, but people don't have as much a problem with that idea as they seem to have.
But they'll discuss that. They're
all day
happy
long.
discussing multiverse all day long. But then we don't have any evidence for a multiverse, which would be that there are multiple universes, right?
Yeah.
That idea is there's multiple universes that don't interact with each other, but that's not a theory because it's not testable.
Yeah.
If it's not testable, it's not scientific. And I'm sorry, it's not scientific. It's a problem.
Right.
But this whole, but UAPs are off limits for some reason. Why is that?
Yeah. I don't know. My last question to you would be, I mean, given the frustration that a lot of us are feeling and that I'm feeling, and you mentioned it yourself, what do you think are the next steps, and how do we get to a place where there isn't this emotional up and down with it? I mean, is there a way to get to where it's steady progress without the letdowns and the 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, or is that just going to be a part of the process no matter what, given that it's new and different?
I think as long as we are depending on someone else to tell us the answers, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And they might not even intend for that to be the case, but it could very well because they don't know.
Yeah.
I suspect that part of the problem here is that there are some things that are known, but many more that aren't. Many that gives rise to more questions even.
Yeah.
And so even if there is some general information that some agency has about what's going on, crash craft and aliens, fine. Disclosure isn't easy because now this is going to lead to other questions that we don't have answers for. So there's a few signs that suggest that there's more going on here. And here are one or two things. So
Okay.
So in the cases where I've been involved in briefing a government agency, so I've talked to my senator's team twice, House Armed Services Committee, Arrow, every single time, every one of those groups or agencies have asked the same questions. And the main question is, what are your capabilities for detecting things underwater? That has come up every single time.
Okay.
And we know
that's
that
important.
the transmedium aspect of UAPs is an important one. That's one of the 5 observables that the ATIP program came up with, that these things can go from air to water and water to air. But that's been the question every time. What are your capables for detecting things underwater? So there is, to say, for the Pentagon or whoever is going to come up with the next report and say there's nothing to see here, that's nonsense. They're worried about something. Clearly worried about something that we don't have access to. We don't know what's in our oceans. In fact, I had a friend who, he was a NASA researcher with me when we were at NASA Ames. We left around the same time. He went to do robotics, underwater robotics. And we ran into each other at a conference, and he, for fun, he shows me this plot. He goes, we did this great study and we were mapping the seafloor. And he shows me just off the coast of South America, I think it was, off Brazil. They did this line, they mapped the ocean floor along this line. He goes, and we found all these volcanoes along this line. He goes, do you know why there are volcanoes here? Do you know why we're finding volcanoes here? And I was like, I don't know why. It's not near a plate. It's not near a plate boundary, so that's odd.
It's not like the Pacific Rim fire trail
it wasn't
or whatever.
like that at all.
Yeah.
It was in a place where you wouldn't expect it.
Yeah.
And he was kind of quizzing me. He goes, all right, you think about it over lunch, and then I'll tell you at the end. And so finally I gave up. I said, I have no idea why you would find volcanoes there. He goes, because it's the only place we've looked. And I was like, oh God, really? And he goes, yeah, we've never done a study like this anywhere else in the oceans. We don't know what's on our ocean floors. Not in this sense, right? And I said, so there could be volcanoes all over the place. He goes, yeah, we don't know. There could be. That could be normal. We don't know. And I was like, oh wow. But that really drove home the realization, again, a humbling realization that we don't know everything. This planet, it's named Earth. It is aside from Uranus, it is probably the most horribly named planet in our solar system, right? there is it's a water planet. It is
Yeah.
it is 75% ocean. If you take a globe for fun, if you have a globe at home, just do this for fun. Take a globe, rotate it so that you're looking at the Pacific Ocean and right over it and hold it out. And when you hold it out at arm's length, that whole visible part of the globe is just ocean. That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Pacific Ocean's huge,
Yeah.
huge, huge, huge. Um, and you realize this when you're flying across it. If you fly from, I've flown from Los Angeles to um to Brisbane, Australia, and that is what 12 hours of ocean, right? That's a lot of ocean. Or if you fly south, if you go south from New York to Cape Town, that's 15 hours of ocean.
Yeah.
It really drives home the fact that this planet really ought to just be called ocean. This is and we don't have access. We don't have access to our oceans. We really don't know what's down there. Back in the 50s and 60s, the story was that, oh, down in the deep ocean, it's too dark that nothing can live down there, right? And then we start diving down there and we find all sorts of forms of life that we didn't know anything about. There's a lot we don't know about this planet even.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Fukushima nuclear power plant, the tidal wave and the accident, and the next day you've got UFOs showing up. Those UFOs aren't coming from another star system. They came from Earth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it would take a half a light day. The furthest they could be away, it would take a half of a light day for the signals to travel that there was an accident, and then another half of a light day for them to come here, right? If they weren't on Earth. And that's where Carl Sagan got it wrong at one point. Carl Sagan said, I can't believe that you have interstellar travelers arriving at Earth every 2 weeks. And I read that quote and I was like, no, God, Carl, you almost had it. Keep thinking about the problem and you'll see the solution.
Yeah.
They aren't interstellar travelers.
Yeah. They're from here or
They're
nearby.
from here. They live here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's actually the problem. We share this planet with another race, with non-humans who are intelligent.
Yeah.
And we don't know anything about them. And that's and man, I'd love to have a talk with Carl Sagan because he was almost there, right? But once you're holding on to this idea that they're always interstellar traveling, which is hard to do, and it's going to be hard to do,
Yeah.
you believe it's impossible, but it's not. They live here, and they could be from here originally. We just might not know about them yet.
Yeah. Well,
We don't know anything about our oceans.
Exactly. And any long-term survivor on this planet living under the oceans would ultimately become a wise move. If you have the technology to build structures that can endure those kinds of pressures, that's where you're going to be safe from asteroid strikes, from wildfires, from tornadoes and hurricanes and the works.
Yeah.
Underwater is basically the only place where you can survive long-term. And
it's a very safe place to live. Yeah.
Yeah, where it seems like they may be coming from. Well, that's all I have for you, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been great fun.
Yeah, no, and I will finish this up, edit it all together, and get it back to you, get you a link in the next couple of days. And yeah, I really, really appreciate your time. Sorry about yesterday. That sucked, and I feel
Please
embarrassed about it.
don't feel bad. I did that to somebody last week, and it was just a stupid thing. I didn't put it. We changed the date. I didn't change it on my calendar, and then totally forgot about it.
I think I had scheduled you for a Wednesday, and then I had scheduled somebody else on something for my day job on a Thursday, and then I just in my head swapped him over.
In your head, it was just all on Thursday. But
yeah.
I understand, and it did not mess me up at all yesterday. So I'm not. It's fine. Please don't worry.
And I appreciate your insights and stuff. You're a brilliant, man, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. So.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. That's
no problem. Thank you.
This is great fun. It's a fascinating topic, and I wish that my fellow scientists were more fascinated instead of being stubborn.
I've had the same issue with journalists. Like I was at a press conference yesterday and someone mentioned my podcast and was like, oh, well, you don't need to be in journalism for that long because the UFO thing's really going to take off. Har, 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 And I was like, whatever, man.
It's a new one. I haven't heard that before.
Yeah, I'm in this to get rich. That's what I'm doing right now. I work at PBS and I'm.
Oh God, yeah, UFOs will make you rich.
Exactly right. Yeah.
No.
Someday maybe. When I meet someone and go to planet Xantar and interview their king, maybe.
Maybe then. Yeah.
Yeah. All right,
No, the
man.
whole and you're right. The whole paranormal thing is really bizarre. It's really really strange. But that's the only way I can make sense of it is that this is just an aspect of our universe that we're not familiar with, and they're using it in their technology somehow.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's disconcerting because like when Fitzpatrick goes on Scientific American and says there's this cadre of true believers from OSAP and ATIP that are going around
Yeah,
convincing everyone as if all these people are just dupes and have no ability to think for themselves. It's
no,
just like it makes it so that you don't want to talk about this stuff. But to me, some of that stuff's the most exciting because it may reveal the most fresh information, and
yeah.
that's what I
Well,
find.
this is one of the problems, and in fact, some small group of us scientists who are studying UFOs have decided we have to also pay attention to the paranormal stuff because it's important, clearly.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make sense, and so there are some of us paying attention, and in fact, I can't name names, but there's a group that went and collected data recently,
Hmm.
and they had paranormal things happening while they were watching UFOs. They would see a UFO and they'd go out and try to get better pictures, and then I can't describe what all happened. All sorts of weird stuff happened.
But
I
so
mean, it
weird stuff
doesn't
was
make any
happening.
sense.
Yeah, yeah.
It all
See,
happened. Yeah.
yeah, that's the thing. I mean, like, and I have a hard time. I mean, I'm a reporter, right? So I go out on the street, and if I interview somebody who saw something, I'm going
Yeah.
to quote them, and they're going to bear the responsibility of their word, but I'm going to take their word for it, right? I'll
Yeah.
vet them and whatnot, but we're basically saying that anybody who comes up with an explanation that we're not willing to accept, we're not willing to take their word on it. And
Right.
I can't accept that logic. That's why I'm trying to.
Yeah, you're willing to only believe things that you're only willing to believe somebody as long as they're telling something that you already believe is true,
Exactly right. Yeah. And then basically,
which isn't a good way to think.
no, and you basically disenfranchise, all kinds of people who have experiences outside the norm,
That's right.
and that's
You're not going to learn anything new that way.
exactly right. And then we're back to
That's right. That's the
the
problem.
modesty or humility argument. We
Humility
need to be
argument.
way
That's
more
right.
human. All right, sir. Well, I'll take care. Have a good day,
All right. You
and
too.
I'll
Thank
be in
you.
touch. All right. Thank
All
you.
right. Take care.
Bye bye.